Hi there, and welcome to Let's Slow Down, a podcast for all of you who feel tired and stressed from this overwhelming world. Here we'll have fun, inspiring conversations about living life on our own terms and explore ways to ease the pace of our modern world, because life really is good when you're relaxed enough to be present for it. I'm your host, Anne-Marie Stolting, and I welcome you to this space where I hope to inspire you to slow down, because life is too short to let it go by in a blur. So take a deep breath, relax, and enjoy the show. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Let's Slow Down podcast. My guest today is Jeff Golden. He's an award-winning author of Reclaiming the Sacred, Healing Our Relationships with Ourselves and the World, which won the prestigious Nautilus Grand Prize and was named Best Environmental Book of 2023 by Indie Reader. Drawing on insights from thousands of psychologists and economists, Jeff distills years of groundbreaking research in his transformative work. With over 12 years of research and writing invested in Reclaiming the Sacred, Jeff has been teaching a course based on the book since 2017, originally at Vassar College, and since 2020 in an online format open to all. Living a life rooted in simplicity and gratitude, two of my favorite things, Jeff seeks to honor the wonder and miracle of the natural world. He embraces a mostly vegan lifestyle and has committed to avoiding air travel as part of his response to the ongoing climate crisis. With more than 3 decades of experience writing and teaching about the intersection of money, happiness, and purpose, Jeff will guide us today through the profound ways that money impacts well-being, sometimes enhancing it, but often undermining it. He'll also explore how money hooks so many of us and offer insights into transcending these traps to lead richer, more meaningful lives. Welcome to Let's Slow Down, Jeff.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
So great to have you. I'm so excited to talk to you today. And I want to start this episode a little differently than I normally do. As I was preparing, I was able to watch, there's a beautiful YouTube video that I want to encourage all the listeners to check out. I will link it in the show notes. And it promotes his book, and it's just, there's so many interesting statistics in it. There is a beautiful watercolor, this artist who does these beautiful illustrations along the way to go with it. And boy, does it make you think. So I'm going to take a minute, Jeff, and just share some of my takeaways from the video, and then we can just jump into talking about all of it and what inspired you to start researching this stuff. So does that work for you?
Wonderful.
Okay. So this YouTube video takes us back less than 100 years ago to the 1940s. And you mentioned that as late as the 1940s, most Americans lived in conditions that few of us would consider acceptable today. Few even knew what a TV was in 1945. And I want everybody to just think about that for a minute, because we're just talking about a TV here. We're not talking about smartphones or Wi-Fi or electric cars or just any of this stuff that are so common to us now. So a third of American homes didn't have indoor toilets or running water. And even after adjusting for inflation, people made about a third of what we make today. Yet, here's the startling statistic, everyone. As a society, we are statistically less happy than we were in the 1940s. In fact, average rates of happiness have been in a constant state of decline since then. And research shows that we are more depressed and lonelier than ever. In America, we consume more than 2/3 of the world's antidepressants. Drug overdoses are the #1 cause of death under age 50. And each year, 1 in 25 consider suicide. This material wealth and what you call poverty of spirit are intimately connected. Research shows that money and possessions do very little for our well-being, accounting for only 2 to 4% of our happiness. And so really, once our basic needs are met, money does very little to boost our overall happiness. At the same time, the pursuit of money and possessions often crowds out the things that really do matter to our well-being. Americans are addicted to consumerism, and we've talked about that a lot on this show. And as you say, Jeff, we surround ourselves with more possessions, and we've grown further from the sacredness of the world and the sacredness of ourselves. As we've elevated economic growth and production and consumption to the highest measure of success and purpose, we've closed ourselves off from so much joy, wonder, and belonging that are inherent in us and the world. And I love this part. You talk about an opportunity to reorient our lives toward the things that really do matter, the opportunity to shift our attention from the things that we don't have or the things that we have to give up to focus much more on all that we do have, the opportunity to slow down and be present and hear from our deeper callings. And although I've come at this from a little different perspective, one stemming more from exhaustion and overwhelm, I'm working on including these same opportunities in my life. And that's why I started this podcast to highlight this overarching issue. So I feel like we really are kind of talking about the same common themes here. And I just love it. So it's just so excited to have this conversation, Jeff. What inspired you to study this connection between money and happiness and to write this beautiful book?
Oh boy. Well, first of all, thank you for that. That was amazing to just have so much of my work just distilled and shared like that. Part of me was like, wow, I just need to bring you around with me everywhere and just let you do that and do your spiel. And I can just kind of sit back. You conveyed that some of the really key points very well. And one thing that I want to underscore, you and I talked about this briefly before we started recording, but I don't think it's surprising that you and I and so many of us have found ourselves in a similar place, even if we've come from different directions, because we're talking about some fundamental truths here about what nourishes human well being, what we are all drawn to, and what is not going to nourish us, what's going to create discord within us and move us to want something different. And true, we end up finding ourselves in a very similar kind of place. And the other thing I wanted to highlight was that one of the key things that bears out in the research is that a lot of the things that we are yearning for, all of us in our lives, are fundamental truths to being human, to who we are. That is to say, it's not so much about having to go out there and find them or create something different. It really is about uncovering them, about removing the barriers that have come up. As you were talking about the role of money and the way that it often distances us from the sacredness of ourselves and the world, I was just struck by the importance, I think, of recognizing that that's what we're talking about through a lot of this. I mean, a lot of what your show is about it's not how you have to go out there and find this life or create something. It's about how to start to create a little more ease and space so that these things can more naturally emerge on their own, right? Which doesn't mean that
Yes.
there aren't
Yeah.
ways to be actively engaged or intentional about creating the lives that we want or shaping who we are. But in so many ways, it's about just, for example, I talk about just the money and possessions. If we didn't spend so much time orienting our thoughts and feelings around them, so much time around work, managing them, the stress of the clutter and all of that,
Hmm.
then what can emerge? I think it's a really powerful and beautiful message for people to have in mind that joy, purpose, a sense of belonging, these are in many ways inherent to us as human beings. And so it's not about going out there and recreating ourselves, but maybe it is about creating some space to refine ourselves and allow those things to start to just sort of blossom on their own, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
So I just wanted to mention that because that was just I felt that blossoming in me as I was listening to you speak. Now, your question though, which was basically sort of how I began this journey of looking at the money and possessions and such.
Yeah, like, what inspired you to start doing all this research? Because 'Cause you've spent a good portion of your life doing it, and it's
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah, it was over 10 years that I was doing this, and it is an interesting story, I think, because I had been a writer, I'd been an educator, and yet I'd never written a book, and it wasn't one of those things I had dreamed of. I mean, I know people where that is like their dream to write a book. But it wasn't in some ways, it actually speaks to what you and I were talking about, that I lived, a simple enough a life, and one where I was in touch enough with myself and my feelings that I was able to sort of notice and hear these little callings here and there. And I found myself responding to some different things that popped off that I won't go into that detail of the story, but just some little things here and there that I was like, huh, and well, huh, what about that and this? And what I originally imagined actually was inspired to do was potentially write a book that would be fairly brief and where each chapter touched on a key issue in the world around us in a way that was succinct and very sort of biting, if you will, right to the point, and yet also very readable and maybe a little bit of sort of wit or lightness to it. Again, very readable. Something that someone could read as a way of approaching these topics when they don't have a whole lot of time but want to just really dive deep quickly. And what was obvious to me was that I needed to start the book by looking at the relationship between money and happiness, money and well being in general, because at the core of every single one of these key issues of things that we're doing in the world to each other, to the planet, to other creatures, is money and possessions. It's about what are we willing to do to get these things. And we as a society have proven that we are ready to do a whole lot to get money and possessions, right? You could do
Mhm.
episode after episode looking at what
Yes.
we, particularly we as a culture, as a society, have done and continue to do. And so, how to sort of break that link for people and also to look at, well, what creates that link? If and this was what I generally knew already and then dove into 10 years of research. As you just succinctly put it, money only accounts for about 2 to 4% of our happiness on average. And we could dive into a lot more around that. But just with that as a starting place, the question then also is, well, how does it become so important to so many of us, right? If we are giving over such a huge portion of our lives to work and money and possessions, and yet we're no better off for it, we're perhaps even worse off for it. How does it hook us like that? So, those were the questions that I felt like I needed to start with. Just a chapter one, just a brief dive to clear the air on those points. And now
Mhm.
let's look at these issues. And what happened and just eventually became clear was that that was the book. I had it backwards, and
We
it would have
often do. We often do have it backwards. It's like once we, I think, slow down enough to take a minute and look
yeah,
at what the issue is, we realize like, "Oh, okay.
yeah.
It's actually completely different than I had originally thought."
And I think also it's a beauty of the creative process. I mean, I don't know what it was like for you writing your book, but I think we also talked about watercolors. I mean, I think a lot of what's so beautiful about being in a creative space is allowing something to emerge that you didn't perhaps see was gonna be there or intend. And that's completely what happened with this book. Like a piece of clay that I thought was gonna look a certain way, and as I started crafting it, it just completely went in a different direction. What I found was that the deep calling of this book for me was to write about that science of money and happiness. And then, yes, also to then tack on, and it ends up only being probably 12 pages instead of it being the reverse, but 12 pages, just looking at some of the critical issues of our times and the ways that they link back to this drive for money and possessions. And then the final part of the book is really just that blowing it wide open and looking at the potential. You used that word opportunity, the
Mhm.
opportunity we have before us. We do live in a particular time and place. There's a particular culture we've been raised in and completely are bombarded with constantly by the media and so forth, by advertising. And yet, we really do live in one of the most materialistic societies, just, I mean, by objective measures, that has ever existed and that exists in the world today. And so, even for those of us who feel like we have some sense of the importance of slowing down and not getting caught up in that, we're still very much imbued in that. I mean, it was baked into our bones as
Yes.
children, and it
Mhm.
continues to be there. But the final part of the book then says, "Well, let's imagine something completely different, and let's allow the reader to start to taste some of that." And maybe we'll read a little excerpt here or there, depending if the timing works out, but to allow people to just taste and imagine what, a different, say, flip side to all of this could look like. If we were if we were living already more in that truth of our belonging and our joy and our purpose, and maybe these other things were distant murmurings instead of it being the reverse, where we've got so much that's so loud in our faces. And things like the stars and trees and love, and you mentioned in your lessons of the year play, if those things weren't the distant murmurs, if those things were at the heart of our daily existence.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's where the book began, and then that is where the book ended up, was a completely different place. Like I said, about 12 years later, part of the reason for that also was because as much as I am present in the book, it really is about the work of those thousands of other people that you mentioned, the researchers. So the book, if you pick it up, it has about 318 pages, but there are about 80 pages of citations because I wanted people to be really clear that when we say, for example, money only accounts for about 2 to 4% of our happiness, that really is counterintuitive for many of us in this society. And so I didn't want
Oh,
that
yeah,
just to be
that really made me think. When I read that, I was like, "Whoa," I
right.
never really thought about it before, but having that, like, tangible number to put with it, it just was really interesting.
Right. And so if I had written a book where I said, "Hey everyone, money only accounts for a small portion of our happiness." And you're like, "Okay, that's cool that you think that, Jeff." But instead, I have 80 pages of citations from the psychologists and economists who've done that research. And anyone who wants to can go and read more and dig deeper, right? Now we've got a different starting place for how this conversation is going to unfold. And I do want to add, since you mentioned it and now I've mentioned it, that 2 to 4% statistic, I do think it's important to acknowledge that money can play a critical role in our well-being in particular people's lives, and for many of us at particular junctures in our lives. So what you said about the meeting our basic needs is really the critical point there, that once we can meet our basic needs, additional money does almost nothing for our happiness on average. But if we cannot meet our basic needs, then some of us who've experienced, say, homelessness or hunger or those kinds of things can speak to how stressful and impactful it can be to not have enough money.
Sure.
And yet, at the same time, even those of us who've had that experience, my experience talking with people, and again, the research bears out, there are still other things that matter so much more. Things like relationships, the presence of family and friends. There's a really beautiful study that looked at homeless people in Calcutta, India, and homeless people in the United States. And despite the fact that the Indians lived in, objectively speaking, much worse conditions, they were overall happier than the people in the United States. And in fact, they scored in the positive range of life satisfaction. They were overall satisfied with their lives. The key difference, the people in the United States nailed it because when they were asked, "Well, what do you miss most from your previous life before you were homeless?" And consistently what they named was family and friends, connections with other human beings that were meaningful. And the people in India, even though they were homeless, had often somehow maintained those, just the nature of society there versus here and the way that homelessness was treated. And so that speaks to one of those central factors that really does nourish human well-being, that is a central factor to our happiness, that still matters more than money, even when we don't have enough to meet our basic needs. And actually, I'm just going to draw from you once again when you talked about your year-end reflections. And I think it was like your second point was really about we, to a large degree, choose the life that we experience based on our own the choices we make about how we want to perceive things, about how we're going to bring ourselves to a situation. I mean,
Yep.
that right there summarizes essentially what all of these findings in terms of economists and psychologists have to say, because there are factors like friends and family, the amount of time we spend working, our physical health. I refer to these as sort of the external factors. These are the factors about the world around us, our circumstances, and again, money and possessions, those kinds of things. All of those matter to a certain degree. Again, I'm going to highlight, for example, the relationships matter a whole lot more than the money. And yet, what matters even more in terms of the factors that we have some control over anyway are the internal ones, and they have to do with just our perspective, and I often like to use that old, sort of cliched, but so true, the glass half full or half empty. objectively speaking, if you look at that glass, you could argue either way. You could spend a week arguing. It's just they're both true. It's half empty and half full.
Right.
But which way you are inclined to look at it makes all the difference in how you feel, how you move through your days, the decisions that you make, the way that you interact with and treat the people that you love and care about, the way you engage with your work, all of these things. It makes all the difference. And the point that I like to make in the book, and actually maybe I will read a brief excerpt at some point that relates to this, is that the truth for most of us is that the glass is 98% full, and we have a glass to begin with.
I was gonna say that. I've heard that where people say, "Well, you have a glass, so no matter what it is, you start with that. You have the glass. Be
Oh,
grateful for it."
I
Yeah.
love that's out there.
Yes.
Someone said that to me, and I was like, "Oh, I wanna use that, can I? That's
Yeah.
great."
Same.
Yeah. The truth is that most of us, and here's another one of those places where slowing down and decluttering can be so important because it creates the space to notice things. One of the things the research affirms over and over again is that humans are very adaptable and adaptive. So no matter how little or how much we have, we tend to adapt to it, which is why getting that huge new flat screen TV or car or huge house doesn't do much for us. It maybe gives us an initial thrill for a little bit, but then it's pretty much gone. And the truth goes as well for the reverse. When bad things happen, hard things happen in our lives, those actually take a little bit longer than the positive things to clear. But generally speaking, to give one example, a study that looked at people who had won the lottery, and I mean like won it big, won the millions and cajillions, and the same study also looked at people who had suffered very bad automobile accidents and physical injury. And for both sets of people, after about 3 months, they were just as happy after as they were before.
Wow.
Again, we're very adaptable. And now the truth is that for someone who had no money or was really living in deprivation and they won the lottery, well, no surprise then, it provided a longer term boost that lasted for them. And likewise, anyone who was actually injured to the degree that they lost the ability to use their body, like completely paralyzed entire body, that had a long-term negative impact. But even people who lost the use of their legs, or some lost the use of some of their hands to some degree, those people still after about 3 months were at the same place, and it speaks to what we were talking about, the perspective that you bring to every day. And when I say perspective, it breaks down to about 4 different areas, and one of those has to do with gratitude and presence, wonder, those kinds of things, right? Do we enter a day with a sense of, "I'm alive, the sun is shining, look at the colors." And if you don't feel that when you first wake up, I mean, I don't necessarily feel that every morning. I don't mean that that's how you're supposed to feel. But if that's something that's part of your experience over a period of time, that you do notice these things and appreciate them, or if you do something intentional, like you keep a list of things that you're grateful for. Maybe at the end of every day, you just note a couple of blessings from that day, a couple of miracles that happen. Or at the end of the week, things like that. If you orient that way, again, one study had people do something like that. And even after they'd stopped, like for 3 months, it was tangible and recordable, the difference in their happiness,
Oh,
bringing
and
that
those
different
types of things
perspective.
really yeah, they stick. So even if you're not intentionally like, something that I do that I started doing as you were talking, I was trying to think, like,
Yeah.
"How long have I been doing this for?" I've talked a lot about gratitude on this podcast. I've had gratitude experts on the show and read a lot of books about it, and one thing that one of my former guests had mentioned was, try when you wake up, first thing, still in bed, just try thinking, "Thank you." That's the first thought.
Hmm.
Let that be your first thought. "Thank you. Thank you for the day.
Hmm.
Hey, you woke up today. Thank you." And I started doing that, and I did it this morning. That is now my
Hmm.
first and
Hmm.
I don't think about it anymore. I wake up and
Hmm.
that's kind of what and we talked about it. There was a 2-hour delay today for both of our families, and
Yeah.
I thought, "Well, thank you. Everybody got to sleep. It was a little bit calmer than it usually is. Thank
Yeah.
you for that."
Yeah.
And just looking for it and like you said, noticing it and finding it and appreciating it rather than jumping into the day with, like, all the things you have to do and all the lists and just letting the day clobber you from the
Yeah.
second you step out of bed, just starting with that little piece of gratitude for me is has made a huge impact. And I find
Yeah.
myself noticing these things, not just when I first wake up, but throughout my day now. Or you talked about the sense of wonder. Last
Yeah.
night, it started to flurry a little bit, and I went out with my 10-year-old. We had to take the dogs out, and it was cold, and it was like flurrying and kind of raining. So I could be realistic and super grumpy, like this stinks. Like I have to take the
Right.
dogs out. And
Yeah.
but we have these two awesome dogs, so we're super lucky. You're like, yep, we had to take them out, but we're lucky that we have them. They add a lot of love and connection and just fun and joy to our life.
Yeah.
But with my 10-year-old, through her eyes, it was one of the first times it snowed this year. And she was I'm like, what are you doing? She's like running around the driveway. She's trying to catch the snowflakes. She's looking up, and we had a flashlight. So I put the flashlight up, and it was so beautiful watching these snowflakes fall. And we ended up doing that for like 5 minutes, and we kinda did it as we were walking the dogs, and we
Yeah.
finished the walk, and she's like, "I'm gonna stay out here for 5 more minutes, mom." And I
Yeah.
thought, "This is what it's all about,
Ah,
finding the joy. You step outside, and this is what we got, so let's enjoy
yeah.
it." And it adds so much to life, and it makes our
I
lives
love it.
richer. Like, I love that you use the word richer because it does. It makes it richer,
Yes.
and what is wealth, and what is being rich, right? Kind
Yeah.
of redefining that for our own lives too, to make them mean something.
And I love it that you just told a story about snowflakes because I'm not gonna go into it right now, but anyone who finds their way to my book might find themselves randomly opening to and finding the special relationship and love that I have for snowflakes. So I love it that that was a bridge for you all to that sense of wonder
Yeah.
and what I am gonna read a brief excerpt here because the title of this I'm just reading the first couple pages of it, but the chapter is Living in Mystery, Magic, and Miracle. And I love it, the experience of miracle, looking up with a flashlight at the snow, right? And just for 5 minutes being in the blessing of that.
Yep.
This chapter reads, it starts with a quote from C.S. Lewis, and he writes, "Miracles, in fact, are a retelling in small letters of the very same story which is written across the whole world in letters too large for some of us to see." And I just have to say, for example, a snowflake as the bearer of that message of miracle, right? That could
Mhm.
otherwise sometimes get lost, but then all of a sudden, just this precise, beautiful snowflake is the messenger for us.
Yes.
The book Charlotte's Web tells the story of a pig Wilbur who lives on a farm and a spider, Charlotte, who weaves messages into her web about how wonderful Wilbur is, so that he will not be slaughtered by the owners of the farm. The following conversation takes place among two of the townspeople after the first message appears. "Have you heard about the words that appeared in the spider's web?" asked Mrs. Arable nervously. "Yes," replied the doctor. "Well, do you understand it?" asked Mrs. Arable. "Understand what?" "Do you understand how there could be any writing in a spider's web?" "Oh, no," said Dr. Dorian. "I don't understand it. But for that matter, I don't understand how a spider learned to spin a web in the first place. When the words appeared, everyone said they were a miracle, but nobody pointed out that the web itself is a miracle. Or, we might add, that the spider itself is a miracle, and the light the web shone by, and the breath and the beating hearts of these two people having this conversation, and the sky, the earth, me, you, everything. I may, like C.S. Lewis and Dr. Dorian, be using the word miracle in a slightly different way than people commonly use it, but I think it's really a better use of the word. It invites us to see the world in a way that is not only more beautiful and alive, but that is also fundamentally more honest and true. It's like in a story where someone looks at a bookshelf when the light is exactly right and a door reveals itself, opening onto an entire other magical world. That is the universe we live in, one grounded entirely in magic, held together in magic, and recreated every moment in magic. All we have to do is get a slightly different angle on just what a miracle is, and let the just right light of that concept, miracle, reveal to us the magic all around us. It is an invitation to awe, to presence, to gratitude, and to greater happiness.
Love it. It's so true.
I love it too. And for me, that passage from Charlotte's Web, what it really brings to life is that 98% that I was referring to. It's the slowing down and noticing your breath and the miracle of movement and color and light, laughter, a child running around. Again, a little bit cliche, but it's the Christmas season. It's the difference between the Scrooge moving through every single day, not only oblivious to, but determined not to see or enjoy these kinds of things, versus the person who makes it their bread and butter of their existence, right? And I, again, wouldn't wanna overwhelm someone or have someone feel bad if that is not the bread and butter of your existence. I mean, I use that expression in some ways as a goal for myself as well. Like, I talk about these things, I've done so much research, and yet I also am a unique individual with my own dispositions, and I live in this same culture, one foot in, one foot out. So I name that as a striving for myself as well. If someone doesn't wake up every morning and just feel grateful, or every morning look out and see snow and see a miracle, that's not there's something wrong or beat yourself up. These are just inclinations, ways to lean, little reminders of possibility, and they're gonna sneak into your life one way or the other because they are just the truth of who we are and what this world is. But to incline ourselves to an openness toward them, I think can just make all the difference.
I agree, and I think it goes back to that choice that we were talking about and just deciding. I give myself these little words, like this winter season, I've been focusing on simplicity and joy because especially we're recording this and it's right before Christmas and it's gonna air in the new year, but this time of year can get crazy, so the complete opposite of simple. And you listen to all the music and Silent Nights and Comfort and Joy and all these things, and it's like you can actually not experience any of that this time of year if you let yourself get too caught up, and I've been there and done that, and if I'm not super intentional right now, I'll end up there again because it just kinda feel like it just whisks you away, and I made this vow to myself, I'm really gonna just try to keep things simple, and when it feels like it's getting to be too much or too overwhelming, I'm gonna scale back, and I'm gonna
Yeah,
focus on looking for the joy.
yeah.
And I've had so much fun doing that. It is amazing as you start how much more pops in, and these things, like you said, were there all the time, to the
Mm.
point where I recently started working in a school, and I met someone who I've walked past her a couple of times over the last few weeks, and she was busy doing her thing, and I was busy doing my thing, but the other day, she wasn't busy, and I had a minute, and she said, "Hey, I know you're new. Just wanna introduce myself. Hi, my name is Joy." And I almost fell over because I'm like, "Wow, I'm literally running into Joy now." And I thought it was
Uh-huh.
so funny, but, like, not really a coincidence. Like, I'm like, "Of course your name is Joy. Of course it
So
is."
beautiful. I love
And
that.
yeah, it's just crazy when you start
Yeah,
to, like you said, make that choice and
yeah,
just allow it. It's already there, so just allow it
yeah,
to actually be happening, to be seen.
yeah.
I just wanna just mention to everyone that it's way more fun to live like that. So, I would recommend trying it.
Well, you're absolutely right, and again, I'm here to say the research backs you up 100%. I tell a story in the book that was really profound for me. It was an experience. I was at a meditation retreat. I don't meditate regularly, but I have had a couple, 2, 3 periods in my life where I've done it more extensively, and I've done, at this point, 3 silent meditation retreats of about a week. And at one of those, it was actually snowing out. It was very cold. I came inside, and there are people there who prepare food for us, so we don't have to worry about that during the retreat. And I came in, and set before me was this bowl of split pea soup. And the warmth of it, I took a bite, the flavor of it, the miracle of it. This bowl having been created for me, the flavor, the nutrition, this was going to nourish my body, the warmth, all of that. I started weeping at with awe and gratitude for this bowl of soup. And for me, it speaks to I don't wanna minimize ever a bowl of soup. Like, what a miracle, and at the
Right.
same time, it's a bowl of soup that we might encounter so many times in our lives and not think anything about. We might eat an entire bowl of soup and not even notice it, depending on
Yes.
where we're at or what we're doing, right? And that's what I think of when you talk about that story about joy rushing in. If we create the space, if we slow down, and I should mention, I mean, meditation is one of those things that comes up as something that can consistently boost our happiness. And in many ways, again, it's not because it creates a new world, it helps create a new reality within us. It creates space for these truths to emerge. We don't have to become someone else. We get to become more fully who we really are without so much distracting and covering up, right? But
Yes.
it's one of those bridges to experiencing more wonder and gratitude and therefore more joy and more of a sense of one of the things I emphasize in my class actually is that my goal is not necessarily for people to be happier per se. but it is for them to live more in the truth of who they are and what they're being called to in their lives, which pretty generally invariably leads to being happier.
Mhm.
But it also sometimes means that maybe if there are some things that are disjointed in your life, out of alignment, there's going to be a period where for you to realign those, there's going to be something that maybe doesn't feel good or is sad or is hard, right? Whether it's work or a relationship or whatever it is internally. The one thing that I want to make sure I mention before, at least while we're still have time during this one conversation we're having, is that one of the other key factors is our relationship with ourselves. That is arguably the single most important factor that we have some control over that affects our happiness. The quality of our relationship with ourselves impacts the quality of our relationship with everybody and everything around us, how we move through the world, how we feel, how we make decisions. And so that's another example, though, of as we do step more fully into the truth of ourselves, maybe there are some things within us that are out of alignment, some places that have been wounded, some maybe really just negative ideas we internalized about ourselves when we were children, things like that. And it doesn't mean that every step of the journey is going to be one of meeting joy every moment, right? There might be times where things are a little bit hard or disjointed, and yet the research is really clear those go hand in hand. Joy and also sadness, anger and frustration and greater happiness, the more that we allow ourselves to experience all of these and have space for those, the happier we are overall.
Sure. I mean, it makes a lot of sense in the way that I now try to approach things that don't feel great, feel really hard or really difficult. I'm going through a few of those things right now in my life, and it's really, well, what's the lesson to be learned here? Well, there's a reason for it. And I think, at least in my personal experience, I have found that to really shift the perspective for me and help me to just giving myself more grace throughout that time. And also to really look for what is the message here, whether it is learning something about myself or learning about
Mm,
something that needs to shift or change or be removed, be decluttered, whether it's a relationship or a thing or less on the calendar, whatever it is, or a thought, a way of thinking. So I think looking just maybe coming at it from that perspective, that's life. Like, life is not always gonna be easy
yeah,
and fun. It can be a lot of the time if we let
yeah,
it. But
yeah.
just saying, "Well, what's the lesson here? For some reason, this came across my path right now, and we could avoid it forever." That's also not the
And it'll
healthiest
keep
way.
coming back, and it'll keep coming
Exactly.
back.
Exactly. So, okay, well, guess we're gonna deal with this, and just what can we learn from it? And I'm trying to raise my children that way and to look
Yeah,
at, because they're at ages, and yours are too, similar ages, they're old enough, they're gonna experience they are experiencing these things. So, how
yeah.
to model that, and then also how to guide them and help them navigate these challenges and to come at it from that perspective so that they don't think like, "Oh, why me? Why me?" Well,
Yeah.
maybe you were picked to have this experience for a really important reason, and it's gonna
You
shape who you are.
you nailed it. There are the 2 most critical things that affect how we move through difficult times. One of them is exactly what you're talking about, being able to look and say, "Well, what is the silver lining here?" Even in the worst of worst situations, there are always a little flowers here and there that
Mhm.
blossom. And the other thing is, though, to not try and just force being happy or just be in the
Right.
silver lining-ish of it, right? Like, in our society, especially, for example, one woman who I don't remember who it was right now, but it's in my book, so if you want to, you can look it up and see who it was there. I wanna give her credit, but she talks about when she was going through the grief of having lost her father, she felt like everyone was just trying to rush her through like she was in some dangerous alley, was the term that she used. She's like, I lost my father. Give me some time to be with that. This is a I don't know if she used the word sacred, but this is a sacred time that we're in. Those and so it's both of those, right? It's
Yes.
allowing ourselves to be with and not rush out of, and the fact that it just sucks and horrible, horrible things happen. And we don't need to sugarcoat that. And part of it also is we do learn and grow from those experiences, and there are little blossoms that emerge even in the darkest of corners. And as we can start to orient towards those and build on those as we recreate ourselves in the aftermath of these times, we're in a position to be much more joyful and to more fully realize our potential to release, in a sense, who we were and step into the full possibility of what is waiting to emerge on the other side.
Yes, I love that, and I think that that really sums everything up nicely. Our conversation today is really finding that opportunity. Like, there are some the statistics you bring to light are really eye-opening. They make you think, and maybe, perhaps they offer you an opportunity to shift or just ponder this stuff and think about, well, how are these things affecting my life and my happiness, and
Yeah.
what can we do with that? So I think
Yeah.
it's just great food for thought. And I
Thank
mentioned that
you.
I was going to link the video, but I will certainly link the
Yes.
book as well. Obvious.
So
Yeah.
I mentioned this to you before we started, but 100% of the proceeds from this book go to a number of nonprofits. So it's with just entire delight and a disconnect from the money piece of it that I would encourage everyone. I did. I spent over 10 years, and many people, the thousands of people have spent their lives doing this research. There's a lot in this book. So if you have a chance, either at the library or buy a copy, and it's one of those books where if you just flip it open and just see what little wisdom has been perhaps waiting in those pages for you to come and specifically open it and find it there. Hopefully that will incline you in some of these directions as well. And then you said you always love practical tips. And I really love the idea of no matter where you're at or what you're doing in your life, if you can just carve out, even if it's 15 minutes a week or 15 minutes a day, but a space that allows you to orient in this direction. A lot of these things, they aren't overnight changes. They do
Sure.
come with time. But with every 15 minutes that we nourish that part of ourselves and incline ourselves in that direction, we just orient ourselves slightly differently in the world. And before you know it, joy is introducing herself at work. It's
Yes.
the difference of a half degree of where we orient ourselves in our lives over the course of a lifetime, you're in an entirely different continent.
Yep.
So to just stick with
So
it
powerful. Yeah.
and give yourself just the little changes, and don't be discouraged if it's not huge things overnight, but just stick with it and give yourself the gift of the little bit of time every week.
I love that. I love that. And Jeff, where can everybody find you? I'll again put it all in the show notes, but why don't you tell them?
Well, the key thing is reclaiming the sacred. That's the name of the book. It's the name of the course. It's where my website is. So if you just look Reclaiming the Sacred Jeff Golden, you'll find me. You'll find the course that you mentioned, which is a by donation course. I cap each time to 12 participants. So anyone out there who wants to participate, I would love to have you join for that. And then the book, of course, is available at any bookstore. If they don't have it in hand, they can order it or online. Or make sure your library has it, because then you get to read it and so many other people do as well. So, thanks for asking about that.
Of course. Of course.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for this really great conversation and for taking the time today.
such a pleasure and such a timely thing. Thanks for having me during the winter, the snow, the
Yes.
changes, Christmas, everything.
Of
Feels right.
course. It sure does. Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, be well.
I hope you've enjoyed our journey together. Please take a moment to rate and review the show. It really helps us grow and reach others looking to slow down too. Wishing you simplicity and ease in your world, and I'll see you back here next week.